The parade ground fell silent when Lieutenant Colonel Davies pointed at the young woman in faded fatigues. "She's wearing old gear," a visiting officer whispered, disgust in his voice. But Davies didn't flinch. "That's standard issue for battlefield heroes," he replied, his tone sharp enough to cut steel. What that officer didn't know, what nobody at the ceremony knew, was that 3 weeks earlier, those worn-out fatigues had been soaked in blood, mud, and mountain water while Isla Martin crawled through enemy territory to save 11 lives that everyone else had written off as lost. This is the story of how the soldier they mocked became the hero they couldn't ignore. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out, subscribe now for more. The mess hall at Camp Valkyrie was never truly quiet, but at 0530 hours, it came close. Isla Martin sat alone at a corner table, her breakfast tray pushed aside, her attention fixed on a worn tactical map spread across the scarred wood. At 23 years old, she'd been stationed at this remote European forward operating base for 7 months, and in that time, she'd learned one undeniable truth: dedication meant nothing if you didn't look the part. Isla was small, barely 5 feet 3 inches and slight in build, with features that made her look younger than her years. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform always pressed, her boots polished to a mirror shine. She did everything by the book and then some. Yet when mission assignments were posted, her name appeared only in support roles: communications monitoring, supply coordination, equipment maintenance. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd graduated top of her class in tactical analysis, could read terrain like others read newspapers, and had memorized every protocol in the combat rescue manual. But none of that mattered when senior officers looked at her and saw someone who needed protecting rather than someone who could do the protecting. "Morning, Martin." Sergeant Henrik Larson dropped his tray onto the table across from her. Unlike most of the base personnel, Henrik had always treated her with professional respect, even if he didn't understand her obsessive preparation. "Studying again? You know they're not assigning you to field ops anytime soon." "Maybe not," Isla replied, not looking up from her map. "But when they do, I'll be ready." Henrik shook his head with a mixture of admiration and pity. "You've been saying that for months. Face it, they see you as admin support. That's not going to change just because you memorize every hilltop in a 50-kilometer radius." Isla finally met his eyes. "Then I'll memorize a 100-kilometer radius." The conversation ended as Lieutenant Colonel Davies entered the mess hall, and the room snapped to attention. Davies was old-school military, weathered, stern, and absolutely uncompromising about protocols and chain of command. His presence meant something important was happening. "At ease," Davies announced. "Mission briefing in 20 minutes. All field-qualified personnel report to operations immediately." The mess hall erupted into controlled chaos as soldiers hurried to finish meals and gather equipment. Isla remained seated, knowing the briefing wasn't meant for her. Field-qualified personnel, that meant everyone except her and a handful of others deemed unsuitable for combat operations. Henrik stood, hesitating. "You coming to watch, at least?" "What's the point?" Isla's voice was flat. "The point is staying informed. Come on." Against her better judgment, Isla followed him to the operations center. The briefing room was packed with the base's best: pilots, medics, tactical specialists, all standing around a large digital display showing mountainous terrain marked with red zones. Isla found a spot against the back wall, her notebook ready even though she knew her observations wouldn't be requested. Davies stood at the front, his face grave. "Gentlemen and ladies," he added with a glance toward the 3 female soldiers in the room, though his eyes skipped over Isla entirely, "we have a situation. A civilian research team went missing 48 hours ago in Sector 9. Last known position puts them in hostile territory, approximately 15 kilometers from here in extremely difficult terrain." The display zoomed in on a jagged mountain range. Isla's breath caught. She knew this area. She'd studied it extensively, noting every approach route, every potential hazard, every seasonal consideration. She'd done it because it was the kind of terrain where rescue operations could be needed, exactly like now. We're assembling a search and rescue team, Davies continued. Larson, you'll lead. Take Henderson, Costa, Friedman, and Novak. You leave in 2 hours. Weather window is narrow, heavy storms forecasted by nightfall. Isla's hand shot up before she could stop herself. Davies's expression shifted from surprise to irritation. Yes, Martin. Sir, Sector 9 has 3 possible approach routes, but only one is viable in current weather conditions. The northern pass looks clear but has unstable rock formations this time of year. The southern route requires technical climbing equipment beyond standard issue. The eastern approach. Thank you, Specialist Martin, Davies cut her off sharply. The mission team will determine the appropriate route. You're dismissed. The words stung, made worse by the looks from the other soldiers, some sympathetic, others annoyed at the interruption. Isla snapped to attention, gave a crisp salute, and left the room, her face burning. Outside, she leaned against the cold concrete wall and fought the familiar frustration. She'd been right, she knew she was right, but being right didn't matter when no one took you seriously. Henrik found her 10 minutes later as she headed toward the communications building. The rescue team departed at 0730 hours under clearing skies that wouldn't last. Isla watched from the communications center as the convoy of 2 armored vehicles disappeared into the mountain pass, carrying 6 soldiers toward a rescue operation she understood better than any of them. She returned to her assigned duties, monitoring radio traffic, updating equipment logs, filing reports that no one would read carefully. But her mind stayed with that mission, running through scenarios, calculating variables, imagining what Henrik and his team would encounter. By 1400 hours, the first complications emerged. Valkyrie Base, this is Rescue 1, Henrik's voice crackled through her headset, tension evident beneath the professional comm. We've encountered roadblock at Checkpoint Delta. Route is impassable, rock slide, recent, blocking the entire pass. Isla leaned forward in her chair. The northern route, exactly what she'd warned about. She glanced at the operations officer beside her, hoping he'd relay the information to Davies, but he simply logged the update without comment. Rescue 1, this is base, the operations officer responded. Assess alternate routes and advise. There was a long pause. Isla could imagine Henrik studying his map, seeing what she already knew. The southern route would add hours they didn't have, and it required equipment they hadn't brought. Base, we're looking at significant delay via southern alternate. Request guidance. The operations officer turned to Lieutenant Colonel Davies, who had joined them in the communications center. Isla stood near the back, officially present only to monitor equipment channels, but her attention was locked on the situation developing in real time. Davies studied the tactical display, his jaw tight. What about the eastern approach? That route requires technical climbing gear, sir, the operations officer said. The team isn't equipped for it. Isla couldn't stay silent anymore. Sir, there's another option. Every head in the room turned toward her. Davies's expression darkened. Specialist Martin, you're here to monitor equipment frequencies, not provide tactical input. With respect, sir, I've studied this terrain extensively. There's a footpath, barely visible on satellite imagery, that branches off the eastern route about 2 kilometers in. It's steep but doesn't require technical equipment. It'll save them 3 hours compared to going south. A footpath, Davies repeated, his tone skeptical. And you know this how? I've analyzed every available map and satellite image of Sector 9, sir. The path exists, it's an old shepherd's trail, probably hasn't been used in years, but it's there. Davies looked at her for a long moment, and Isla could see the calculation in his eyes. Believe the logistics specialist who'd never been in the field, or follow established protocols that would burn precious time. Sir, Henrik's voice came through again, weather's deteriorating faster than predicted. If we take the southern route, we won't reach the research team before the storm hits. Davies's hands clenched into fists. He turned to Isla. This path you're talking about, how confident are you? 90%, sir. I can't guarantee the condition, but I'm certain it exists and provides the shortest viable route. Another pause. Isla could feel the weight of the moment. If she was wrong, she'd just send a rescue team on a wild chase that could cost civilian lives. Davies keyed the radio. Rescue 1, proceed to Eastern Route Waypoint 77. You'll be looking for a footpath branching northwest. Specialist Martin believes it will provide access without technical equipment. Copy that, base. Moving to Waypoint 77. The next 2 hours were the longest of Isla's life. She stayed at her station, tracking the team's progress through terrain that existed in her mind as vividly as if she'd walked it herself. Every radio check felt like a judgment on her credibility. At 1,647 hours, Henrik's voice returned, and Isla detected something new in his tone: respect. Valkyrie Base, Rescue 1. Martin's path exists and is navigable. We've made excellent time. Estimate arrival at research team's last known position in 30 minutes. Relief flooded through Isla, but she maintained her composure, only allowing herself a small exhale. Around the communications center, she caught sideways glances from other personnel, looks that weren't quite respect yet, but were no longer dismissive. Davies approached her station. Good work, Specialist. Thank you, sir. Don't let it go to your head. You're still on communications duty. Yes, sir. But something had shifted. That evening, when Henrik's team successfully located and evacuated the research team, 11 civilians, 2 injured but all alive, word spread about the logistics specialist who'd found a path that wasn't on any official map. For the first time since arriving at Camp Valkyrie, soldiers started seeking Isla's input during mission planning. Not officially, not in briefings, but in quiet conversations over coffee or in chance encounters near the operations center. She'd proven something important: knowledge was its own kind of strength. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. 2 weeks after the successful rescue, Isla noticed the atmosphere around her had changed, but not in the way she'd hoped. The respectful glances had morphed into something else: suspicious sidelong looks, hushed conversations that stopped when she entered a room, a subtle but unmistakable shift in how her fellow soldiers treated her. It started small. During equipment inventory, Corporal Anders questioned her counts 3 times, implying she might have made errors. Just want to make sure everything's accurate, Martin, he'd said, his tone suggesting he doubted her competence despite her flawless record. Then came the incident in the operations planning session. Isla had been actually invited, to provide input on terrain analysis for an upcoming patrol route. She prepared thoroughly, bringing detailed notes and alternative route suggestions based on recent weather patterns and intelligence reports. Captain Reeves, the patrol commander, had listened to her presentation with an expression that grew increasingly cold. When she finished, he dismissed her recommendations entirely. I appreciate your enthusiasm, Specialist Martin, but I think we'll stick with standard protocols. Sometimes overthinking leads to unnecessary complications. The comment stung, especially when she'd watched the same captain accept similar suggestions from male specialists without question just days before. But what hurt more was the murmur of agreement from other soldiers in the room, people who'd previously seemed supportive. The real blow came during physical training. Isla had always pushed herself hard, consistently scoring in the top percentile for endurance runs and combat fitness tests. She was in the middle of her routine when she overheard Private Chin talking to another soldier near the weight racks. I'm just saying, it's weird how Martin suddenly has all this terrain knowledge, Chin was saying, not bothering to lower his voice much. Where does someone in logistics get that kind of detail? She's never even been on a field operation. What are you suggesting? The other soldier asked. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just asking questions. How does she know about paths that aren't on official maps? How does she have information about areas she's never visited? Makes you wonder about her sources. Isla's hands tightened on the pull-up bar. The implication was clear and ugly. Chin was suggesting she had inappropriate intelligence contacts, or worse, that her information came from unauthorized or even hostile sources. She dropped from the bar and walked directly toward Chin, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "If you have questions about my methods, Private Chin, you can ask me directly." Chin had the decency to look uncomfortable. I didn't mean. I study publicly available satellite imagery, topographical surveys, and historical maps in my personal time, Isla said clearly, loud enough for everyone in the training area to hear. I read mission reports and weather analyses. I take notes and cross-reference data. It's called being thorough, not suspicious. Look, Martin, nobody's accusing you of anything, Chin backtracked. It's just unusual for someone to be so intense about their job. Unusual for a woman, you mean? The words came out sharper than she intended, but the truth of them hung in the air. Chin wouldn't question a male soldier's dedication the same way. That's not fair, Chin protested, but his eyes wouldn't meet hers. Isla walked away before she said something that would truly damage her career. But the damage was already done. By evening mess, she could feel the isolation closing in. The table where she usually sat with Henrik and a few other friendly faces was full, with no room made for her. Conversations quieted when she passed. Henrik found her later, sitting alone outside the communications building, staring at the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. "They're idiots," he said simply, sitting beside her. "They're scared," Isla corrected. "Someone who doesn't fit their expectations succeeded, and that's threatening. It's easier to tear me down than to question their assumptions." "What are you going to do?" Isla looked at him, her jaw set with determination. "Exactly what I've been doing. My job. Eventually, they'll either accept that I belong here, or they won't. But I'm not going anywhere." The summons to Lieutenant Colonel Davies' office came 3 days later, delivered by a stone-faced corporal who wouldn't make eye contact. Isla's stomach dropped. Official meetings with the commanding officer rarely meant good news, especially when rumors had been circulating about her unusual behavior and questionable information sources. She knocked on Davies's door at precisely 1,400 hours, her uniform immaculate, her bearing military perfect. Whatever was coming, she'd face it with dignity. "Enter." Davies sat behind his desk, her service file open before him. Captain Reeves stood to one side, his expression neutral but his presence ominous. This wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "Specialist Martin, sit down." Davies's tone was formal, commander to subordinate with no warmth. Isla sat, back straight, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward. "I'm going to be direct," Davies began. "Concerns have been raised about your conduct and your methods of gathering intelligence. Specifically, questions about how you obtained detailed terrain information that wasn't part of your official duties or clearance level. Sir, all my research has been conducted using publicly available resources and standard military databases that any personnel can access," Isla replied, keeping her voice level. "So you admit you've been conducting research beyond your assigned responsibilities?" Reeves interjected. "I admit I've been studying to improve my capabilities, sir. The same way any soldier might study tactics or medical procedures or equipment maintenance in their personal time." Davies leaned back in his chair. "The difference, specialist, is that your studies directly influenced the mission outcome. What if you'd been wrong? What if that path hadn't existed? You put 6 soldiers and 11 civilians at risk based on analysis you conducted without authorization or supervision." The words hit hard because they carried truth. Isla had taken a risk, had inserted herself into a life-or-death situation without official sanction. The fact that she'd been right didn't erase the irregularity of her actions. "You're correct, sir," she said quietly. "I overstepped. But with respect, if I'd remained silent, the mission would have failed. Those civilians would have died in the storm. Was I supposed to let that happen just to follow proper channels?" "Yes," Reeves said bluntly. "That's exactly what military discipline means. Following orders, respecting chain of command, not freelancing based on personal initiative." Davies held up a hand, silencing Reeves. That's the question, isn't it? Where's the line between initiative and insubordination? Between being prepared and being insubordinate? He closed the file and looked at Isla directly. I've reviewed your record, Martin. Exemplary performance in logistics. Top marks in every training evaluation. Not a single disciplinary issue until now. You're clearly intelligent and dedicated. But? Isla prompted, knowing there had to be more. But you're also frustrated, Davies continued. You feel underutilized, overlooked because of your size and gender. That's making you take risks to prove yourself. And that's dangerous, for you and for everyone around you. Isla wanted to argue, wanted to defend her motivations, but she recognized the fundamental truth in his words. She had been trying to prove something, had been pushing boundaries because normal channels weren't giving her opportunities. What happens now, sir? She asked. Davies was quiet for a long moment. That depends on you, specialist. Are you willing to work within the system, or are you going to keep finding ways around it? I want to serve effectively, sir. If that means working within the system, I'll do that. But if the system won't let me use my capabilities, then I need the system to change. The boldness of the statement hung in the air. Reeves looked scandalized. Davies's expression was unreadable. Finally, Davies spoke. Dismissed, specialist. I'll review your situation and make my decision. Until then, you're confined to base and restricted to your assigned duties. No more independent research projects. Yes, sir. Part 5, The Restricted Soldier, 600 words. Confinement to base and restricted duties felt like prison, though technically Isla was still a free soldier. She couldn't leave Camp Valkyrie, couldn't participate in briefings, couldn't even enter the operations center except for her scheduled communications shifts. Her map collection was confiscated for review, along with her personal research notes. The isolation was worse than the restrictions. Word had spread about her meeting with Davies, and the rumor mill transformed it into everything from a severe reprimand to an impending discharge. Soldiers who'd once greeted her with nods now avoided eye contact. The mess hall felt like walking through hostile territory. Even Henrik seemed uncertain around her now. They're saying you might get kicked out, he told her one evening, his voice low. Reeves is pushing for it, calling you a liability. And what do you think? Isla asked. Henrik struggled with the answer. I think you saved my mission and 11 lives. But I also think you scared the hell out of everyone by being right when you weren't supposed to be. That night, Isla lay in her bunk and seriously considered requesting a transfer. Maybe a fresh start somewhere else, somewhere she could just do her job without constantly fighting for recognition. But the thought felt like surrender, and she'd never been good at surrendering. 3 days into her restriction, everything changed. The alarm sounded at 0342 hours, the piercing wail that meant emergency, not drill. Isla was dressed and out of her quarters in 90 seconds, running toward the operations center before remembering she was barred from entry. Captain Reeves intercepted her at the door. Martin, you're restricted. I know, sir, but if there's an emergency, get back to your quarters. That's an order. But Isla could see past him into the operations center, could see the organized chaos of a crisis unfolding. Davies was shouting orders, communication officers were manning multiple channels, and the tactical display showed something that made her blood run cold. A helicopter had gone down. Deep in Sector 11, the most treacherous terrain in the region. Weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly. And the standard rescue protocols for that area would take 12 to 14 hours to implement. 12 to 14 hours that survivors in a crashed helicopter wouldn't have. Isla returned to her quarters as ordered, but her mind was racing. She knew Sector 11, not as well as Sector 9, but she'd studied it. The terrain was brutal, but there were approaches that weren't in standard military databases, old mining roads that could save hours. She pulled out the personal tablet she'd hidden under her mattress, the one device they hadn't confiscated because they hadn't known about it. Her backup research files were still there, including detailed analysis of Sector 11. There it was, a derelict mining access road that branched off the main route about 8 kilometers in. It was risky, potentially unstable, but it could cut response time by more than half. She had two choices: stay in her quarters, follow her restriction, and let the rescue proceed through standard channels while people possibly died. Or break her restriction, face certain disciplinary action, and give them information that might save lives. It wasn't really a choice at all. Confinement to base and restricted duties felt like prison, though technically Isla was still a free soldier. She couldn't leave Camp Valkyrie, couldn't participate in briefings, couldn't even enter the operations center except for her scheduled communications shifts. Her map collection was confiscated for review, along with her personal research notes. The isolation was worse than the restrictions. Word had spread about her meeting with Davies, and the rumor mill transformed it into everything from a severe reprimand to an impending discharge. Soldiers who'd once greeted her with nods now avoided eye contact. The mess hall felt like walking through hostile territory. Even Henrik seemed uncertain around her now. "They're saying you might get kicked out," he told her one evening, his voice low. "Reeves is pushing for it, calling you a liability." "And what do you think?" Isla asked. Henrik struggled with the answer. "I think you saved my mission and 11 lives. But I also think you scared the hell out of everyone by being right when you weren't supposed to be." That night, Isla lay in her bunk and seriously considered requesting a transfer. Maybe a fresh start somewhere else, somewhere she could just do her job without constantly fighting for recognition. But the thought felt like surrender, and she'd never been good at surrendering. 3 days into her restriction, everything changed. The alarm sounded at 0342 hours, the piercing wail that meant emergency, not drill. Isla was dressed and out of her quarters in 90 seconds, running toward the operations center before remembering she was barred from entry. Captain Reeves intercepted her at the door. "Martin, you're restricted." "I know, sir, but if there's an emergency..." "Get back to your quarters." "That's an order." But Isla could see past him into the operations center, could see the organized chaos of a crisis unfolding. Davies was shouting orders, communication officers were manning multiple channels, and the tactical display showed something that made her blood run cold. A helicopter had gone down. Deep in Sector 11, the most treacherous terrain in the region. Weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly. And the standard rescue protocols for that area would take 12 to 14 hours to implement. 12 to 14 hours that survivors in a crashed helicopter wouldn't have. Isla returned to her quarters as ordered, but her mind was racing. She knew Sector 11, not as well as Sector 9, but she'd studied it. The terrain was brutal, but there were approaches that weren't in standard military databases, old mining roads that could save hours. She pulled out the personal tablet she'd hidden under her mattress, the one device they hadn't confiscated because they hadn't known about it. Her backup research files were still there, including detailed analysis of Sector 11. There it was, a derelict mining access road that branched off the main route about 8 kilometers in. It was risky, potentially unstable, but it could cut response time by more than half. She had two choices: stay in her quarters, follow her restriction, and let the rescue proceed through standard channels while people possibly died. Or break her restriction, face certain disciplinary action, and give them information that might save lives. It wasn't really a choice at all. Isla grabbed her tablet and headed back to the operations center. Reeves was still at the door, and his face darkened when he saw her. "Specialist Martin, I gave you a direct order." "Sir, I have information about Sector 11 that could significantly reduce rescue response time." "You're restricted from..." "People are dying." The shout came out louder than she intended, drawing attention from inside the operations center. "Sir, you can court-martial me afterward, discharge me, whatever you want. But right now, there are soldiers in that crashed helicopter who need help, and I know a faster way to reach them." The operations center fell silent. Every eye turned toward the doorway where Isla stood, her tablet clutched in her hands, her career potentially ending with every word she spoke. Lieutenant Colonel Davies pushed through the crowd, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. Specialist Martin, you are directly violating your restriction order. I know, sir. And I accept whatever consequences come from that. But if you'll look at this analysis of Sector 11, I believe I can show you a route that will save 4 to 6 hours of response time. Davies's jaw clenched. Reeves stepped forward, clearly ready to have Isla physically removed, but Davies held up a hand. Everyone else, back to your stations. Captain Reeves, give us the room. Sir, she's violated a direct order. I'm aware, Captain. Give us the room. When they were alone except for one senior communications officer, Davies turned to Isla with an expression she couldn't read. You understand what you've done? This isn't a matter of initiative anymore. This is direct insubordination in the middle of a crisis situation. Yes, sir. I understand completely. Then why? Because being a good soldier isn't just about following orders, sir. It's about serving a higher purpose. Those people in that helicopter, they didn't crash because someone gave a wrong order or broke protocol. They crashed because conditions are unpredictable and dangerous. But their rescue shouldn't fail because we're too rigid to accept help from unexpected sources. Davies studied her for a long moment. Show me what you have. Isla opened her tablet, pulling up her terrain analysis of Sector 11. The standard rescue route goes through the valley approach here. She traced the path with her finger. It's safe, established, but it's also slow because of multiple switchbacks and narrow passages. And your alternative? Old mining road, dating back approximately 60 years. Abandoned when the mineral deposits ran out, but satellite imagery from 6 months ago shows it's still structurally intact. It runs parallel to the valley route but at a higher elevation, cutting out approximately 40 kilometers of winding approaches. Why isn't this on military maps? It's on geological survey maps, sir, but those aren't typically part of military tactical databases. The road was decommissioned decades ago, so it's not in active transportation records either. Davies called over the communications officer. Lieutenant Torres, verify this information with our geological database. While Torres worked, Davies kept his eyes on Isla. If you're wrong about this, you've just wasted critical time. Those helicopter survivors, assuming there are survivors, will pay the price for your arrogance. I'm not wrong, sir. You can't know that with certainty. No, sir. But I'm as certain as I can be without physically walking that road myself. Torres looked up from his computer. Sir, the mining road exists. It's on geological surveys from 2019. Condition unknown, but the infrastructure appears intact in satellite imagery. Davies's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on grim determination. Captain Reeves. Reeves returned immediately, still glowering at Isla. Prepare a rescue team using Specialist Martin's alternate route. But I want engineers with structural assessment equipment in the lead vehicle. If that road shows any signs of instability, we abort to standard protocols immediately. Sir, we're trusting critical mission planning to a soldier who's been right before, Davies interrupted. And who might be right again. Move, Captain. As Reeves hurried away, Davies turned back to Isla. You're going with them. Isla's heart jumped. Sir? You identified the route. You'll ride with the lead team to verify conditions and provide real-time analysis. This is what you wanted, isn't it? A chance to prove you belong in the field? Yes, sir, but... Consider this your final test, Specialist Martin. Either you succeed and prove your methods have value, or you fail and prove that rules exist for good reasons. Either way, we'll know. The convoy assembled in 14 minutes, a testament to Camp Valkyrie's readiness protocols. 2 armored vehicles, a mobile medical unit, and 12 personnel including engineers, medics, and combat-trained rescue specialists. Isla climbed into the lead vehicle, acutely aware that every person here was watching her, judging her, wondering if she'd just sent them on a dangerous detour based on classroom theory and satellite photographs. Sergeant Henrik Larsson took the driver's seat, glancing at her with something between concern and respect. "No pressure, Martin, but if this road doesn't exist, we're going to have problems." "It exists," Isla said, more confidently than she felt. Her tablet showed the route clearly, but satellite imagery couldn't reveal everything: structural integrity, hidden washouts, unstable sections that might have developed since the last survey. The convoy rolled out at 0415 hours under a sky-threatening dawn and worse weather. Radio chatter filled Isla's headset, updates from base, weather warnings, attempts to establish communication with the downed helicopter. So far, no response from the crash site. That could mean communication equipment damage, or it could mean something worse. They reached the junction point where the mining road should branch off at 0502 hours. Isla's heart hammered as Henrik slowed the vehicle, searching the overgrown roadside for the access point. There, Isla pointed to what looked like nothing more than a gap in the vegetation. 30 meters ahead, on the right. Henrik maneuvered closer, and the engineers in the back vehicle deployed to assess the road entrance. Lieutenant Fisher, chief engineer, approached with scanning equipment, his expression deeply skeptical. "This is your shortcut?" Fisher examined the cracked pavement barely visible beneath decades of growth. "Looks more like a hiking trail." "The main road surface is 10 meters in, past the initial overgrowth," Isla said, rechecking her data. "The entrance was deliberately obscured when the mine closed, but the structural road continues." Fisher's team spent 8 agonizing minutes surveying the entrance before he returned to the convoy. "Pavement exists and appears stable. But I'm placing ground-penetrating sensors every 50 meters as we advance. First sign of structural compromise, we reverse course immediately." "Understood," Henrik confirmed. "Martin, you're navigating. Call out every turn, every potential hazard you see on those maps." The convoy crept forward, pushing through overgrowth that scraped against armored sides. Then suddenly, they were through, onto a genuine road surface, cracked and weathered but unmistakably solid. The path wound upward into the mountains, exactly as Isla's analysis had predicted. "Well, I'll be damned," Fisher muttered over the radio. "Road's actually here." But Isla couldn't relax. The entrance was only the first test. The real challenges would come in the mountain sections where geological shifts could have destabilized the route. She monitored her tablet constantly, comparing real-time GPS coordinates with her mapped expectations, calling out warnings about tight corners and elevation changes. At 0547 hours, they encountered their first serious obstacle, a section where part of the roadway had collapsed into a shallow ravine, leaving a gap approximately 4 meters wide. This wasn't on the satellite imagery, Torres reported from the second vehicle. Isla's stomach dropped. Recent collapse, probably from spring runoff erosion. But look, she zoomed in on her display, the road continues on the other side, and there's space to navigate around the gap using the shoulder. Fisher was already out, assessing the terrain. "It's risky. We'd be driving on what's essentially a cliff edge for about 20 meters. Henrik looked at Isla. "Your call. Do we risk it or turn back?" Every eye was on her. This was the moment where theory met reality, where confidence had to transform into actionable judgment. The standard route would take hours they might not have. But one wrong decision here could send vehicles, and soldiers, tumbling into that ravine. Isla climbed out, walked to the edge, and studied the shoulder terrain with her own eyes, not just through digital screens. The ground was rocky, not soft soil. Water had carved the ravine but left stable material along the edge. "We can make it," she said. "Single file, slow speed, but we can make it." "You're sure?" Henrik pressed. "No," Isla admitted honestly. "But I believe the risk is manageable and worth taking." The first vehicle's crossing took 11 minutes of careful maneuvering that felt like hours. Henrik guided the armored vehicle inch by inch along the ravine edge while Isla stood outside, calling distance markers and watching for any sign of ground instability. Rocks crumbled under the massive tires, tumbling into the gap below, but the shoulder held. When they made it across, Isla released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The medical unit followed, then the second armored vehicle, each crossing successfully but burning precious time. Status? Davies's voice crackled through the radio from base command. Obstacle cleared, continuing en route, Henrik reported. Estimate we've saved 90 minutes so far compared to standard approach. Copy that. Weather window closing faster than predicted. You have approximately 2 hours before conditions become critical. 2 hours. Isla checked their progress. They were roughly halfway to the crash site, making good time despite the detour around the collapse. If the rest of the route held stable, they'd make it with time to spare. The mining road climbed higher into the mountains, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Patches of ice appeared on shaded sections, making the already treacherous path more dangerous. But the road surface remained solid, winding through terrain that would have been impossible for the standard valley route. At 0628 hours, they finally established radio contact with the crash site. This is Rescue 1, anyone, copy? The voice was weak, broken by static, but unmistakably human. Rescue 1, this is Valkyrie Actual, Isla responded, her training taking over. We copy you. What's your status? 4 souls, 2 injured, 1 critical, can't, much longer. The transmission dissolved into static. Torres tried to re-establish contact but got only dead air. At least they knew, for survivors, but time was running out for at least one of them. Increase speed, Fisher ordered from the second vehicle. Martin's route is holding. Let's use the time we've saved. The convoy accelerated as much as the terrain allowed. Isla gripped her tablet, cross-referencing their position, confirming they were still on track. 3 more kilometers to the crash site, through increasingly difficult mountain terrain. Then disaster struck. The lead vehicle rounded a sharp corner and Henrik slammed the brakes, sending everyone lurching forward. Ahead, the road simply ended. Not collapsed like the earlier section, but deliberately destroyed, blast marks and rubble indicating the mining company had demolished this section when closing the facility to prevent unauthorized access. Are you kidding me? Henrik breathed. Isla stared at the gap in horror. This wasn't on any of her surveys, wasn't visible in satellite imagery because the terrain angle had hidden it. She'd led them to a dead end with 4 dying people waiting at the crash site and no time to backtrack to the standard route. Fisher was already out of his vehicle, assessing the situation. Gap is approximately 20 meters. No way vehicles cross this. Can we bridge it? Torres asked. Not with our equipment and not in any reasonable time frame. Captain Reeves's voice came through the radio, cold and precise. So we're stuck. Specialist Martin's shortcut has failed. We need to reverse and take the standard route immediately. Sir, that will add at least 3 hours, Henrik protested. The critical patient won't make it. Then that's on Martin's head, Reeves snapped. Isla felt the weight of those words like physical blows. She'd been so certain, so confident in her analysis. But she'd missed this crucial detail, and now people would die because of her arrogance. No. She wouldn't accept that. Isla grabbed her tactical map and studied the terrain around the demolished section. We can't bring the vehicles across, but we can bring the personnel. Look, the gap is road level, but the terrain below drops away gradually. We can rappel down, traverse beneath the destroyed section, and climb up on the other side. It's maybe 40 meters total. That's technical climbing, Fisher said. We'd need to leave most of our equipment behind, including the heavy medical gear. We bring what we can carry, Isla countered. Combat medic packs, portable stretchers, basic stabilization equipment. We get to those survivors, stabilize them, and buy time for a proper extraction team to reach us via the standard route. The decision was made in 30 seconds. Henrik selected a 6-person team, himself, Isla, Fisher, combat medic Corporal Brennan, and 2 rescue specialists, Walsh and Santos. They'd make the climb, reach the survivors, and hold position until the full rescue convoy could arrive via the long route. Torres would take the vehicles back to coordinate the standard approach. It wasn't ideal, but it was the only option left. "You realize this is insane," Fisher muttered as they prepared climbing gear. "We're about to rappel down an unstable mountain face based on a logistics specialist's hunch." "Not a hunch," Isla corrected, checking her harness with hands that barely trembled despite her racing heart. "A calculated risk based on topographical analysis." "Right. And how many mountain climbs have you personally done, Martin? Including this one?" "One." Fisher stared at her. "You've got to be joking." "I've completed all the technical training," Isla said defensively. "Passed every certification. Just never had a field application." "Oh, this just gets better and better," Fisher groaned, but he didn't stop preparing his gear. Henrik secured the primary rope line to the lead vehicle, testing it with his full weight. "Line solid. Martin, you go second after me. If you get into trouble, freeze and wait for help. Don't try to be heroic." "Understood." The descent began at 0652 hours. Henrik went first, demonstrating the route: down 15 meters, traverse right across a rocky outcrop, then down another 10 meters to a ledge that would allow them to move beneath the destroyed road section. From there, they'd climb up the far side. Isla watched carefully, memorizing every movement, every hand and foot placement. Then it was her turn. The moment she went over the edge, every training exercise she'd ever done felt inadequate. Real rock moved differently than climbing walls, wind pulled at her differently than in controlled environments, and the sheer drop below her was terrifyingly authentic. "Remember your breathing," Henrik called up. "Don't look down, just focus on the next handhold." Isla forced herself to move methodically. Right hand to the crack in the rock face, test it, transfer weight. Left foot to the small outcrop, ensure it's stable. One movement at a time, don't think about the 100-meter drop to the valley floor. She made it to the traverse section and paused, her arms already burning. The outcrop Henrik had used was a narrow ridge, barely wide enough for feet, with nothing to grip above. She'd have to move across using friction and balance alone. "You can do this, Martin," Fisher called from above, preparing for his own descent. "Just like training." Except training had safety mats and multiple backup lines and instructors ready to catch you. This had cold wind, loose rock, and very real consequences for failure. Isla took 3 deep breaths, then committed. She moved across the traverse, her body pressed against the rock face, feet sliding carefully along the narrow ridge. Halfway across, a rock broke loose beneath her left foot. She started to slip. Her training took over before panic could. She redistributed weight to her right foot, pressed harder against the rock face, and caught a tiny handhold she'd almost missed. For 3 heartbeats, she hung there, stabilizing. "That's it," Henrik encouraged from below. "You've got it. 3 more meters." Isla completed the traverse and made the final descent to the ledge, her legs shaking as she touched down beside Henrik. That was terrifying. "Welcome to real mountain rescue," Henrik grinned. "The fun part's just beginning." The rest of the team followed, each making the descent successfully despite some close calls. By 0717 hours, all 6 were on the ledge, preparing for the traverse beneath the destroyed road section. This part was easier, a relatively horizontal path along a natural shelf in the rock face, protected from the worst of the wind. They moved quickly, eager to reach the far side and begin the ascent. The climb up was harder than the descent. Isla's arms screamed with fatigue, her fingers raw despite gloves, but she pushed through. When she finally pulled herself over the edge onto solid ground on the far side of the gap, she allowed herself exactly 10 seconds of relief before standing and checking her gear. "Radio check," Henrik ordered. "Brennan, operational. Walsh, operational. Santos, operational. Fisher, operational. Martin, operational. Good. Crash site is 1.8 kilometers northeast. Let's move." They reached the crash site at 0751 hours, and the scene was worse than Isla had imagined. The helicopter lay crumpled at the base of a steep ravine, its tail section completely separated, cockpit crushed against a massive boulder. It was a miracle anyone had survived at all. 4 figures huddled near the wreckage, 3 helping to stabilize a 4th who lay motionless on a makeshift stretcher. As the rescue team approached, one of the survivors looked up, and Isla saw the recognition and relief flash across his exhausted face. "Valkyrie rescue team," Henrik called out. "We're here to help." The survivor who'd looked up was a pilot, his flight suit torn and bloody but his eyes clear. "Thank God. We've been trying to reach base for hours. Thompson's in bad shape, compound fracture, possible internal injuries. We need immediate evacuation." Corporal Brennan was already moving, her medical training evident in every efficient motion as she assessed the injured soldier. "Fracture's bad, and he's showing signs of shock. We need to stabilize and get him out of here fast." While the medics worked, Henrik coordinated with base command. "Valkyrie actual, we've reached the crash site. For survivors, 1 critical. Requesting immediate extraction via standard route. What's the ETA on the main convoy?" Davies's voice came through, tense but controlled. "Standard route convoy is en route but experiencing delays. Weather's deteriorating faster than predicted. Earliest arrival is now estimated at 1,130 hours. Isla checked her watch. 0755 hours. That meant 3.5 hours of waiting in increasingly dangerous conditions with a critically injured soldier who might not have 3.5 hours. She studied the crash site, then pulled up her tablet, examining the surrounding terrain. There had to be another option, something she'd overlooked in her initial planning. Then she saw it, a narrow pass cutting through the mountains approximately 2 kilometers west of their position. It wasn't a road, barely qualified as a trail, but satellite imagery showed it connected to a service route that eventually joined the standard rescue path much closer to base. "Henrik," she called him over, showing him the screen. "This pass, if we could get Thompson to its northern terminus, it would cut the evacuation distance by more than half. The main convoy could reach us in 90 minutes instead of 3 hours. Henrik studied the map, his expression skeptical. "That's rough terrain, Martin. Moving a critically injured person through there could kill him. So could waiting 3.5 hours for extraction while his condition deteriorates," Isla countered. "Brennan, what's your medical assessment?" The medic looked up from her patient, her face grim. "He's stable for now, but that won't last. Internal bleeding is my primary concern. I can't stop what I can't see. Every minute we wait increases the risk." Fisher joined them, looking at Isla's proposed route. "That pass is technical hiking at best. With a stretcher? Nearly impossible." "Nearly," Isla repeated. "But not completely. You're suggesting we carry a critically injured soldier over 2 kilometers of mountain terrain, through a pass that might be impassable, on the chance that it saves time?" Fisher shook his head. "That's beyond risky." "It's also our best option," Henrik said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. "Martin's been right about terrain so far. She got us here when conventional wisdom said it was impossible. I say we trust her judgment one more time." The weight of that trust settled on Isla's shoulders like physical pressure. These soldiers were putting a man's life in her hands based on satellite imagery and terrain analysis she'd done in her quarters during off hours. If she was wrong, Thompson would die because of her. But if she did nothing and waited for the standard route convoy, he might die anyway. "I can get us through that pass," Isla said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "But we need to move now. Every minute counts." Captain Reeves's voice suddenly cut through the radio, sharp with authority. "Negative. Rescue team will hold position and wait for primary extraction. That's a direct order." Henrik's jaw tightened. He looked at Isla, then at the injured soldier, then at his radio. In that moment, Isla knew he was making the same impossible choice she'd made when she'd violated her restriction to reach this operations center. "Sir, with respect, the medical situation is critical. We're proceeding with alternative extraction via Western Pass. Valkyrie rescue actual out. He switched off the radio before Reeves could respond. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. They moved out at 0809 hours, 6 soldiers carrying a makeshift stretcher through terrain that seemed determined to kill them. Walsh and Santos took the first stretcher shift, with Fisher and Henrik ready to rotate in. Brennan stayed close to Thompson, monitoring his vitals constantly, while Isla led the way, her tablet in one hand and her other hand touching rock faces for balance. The pass started deceptively easy, a gentle slope through scattered boulders. But within 15 minutes, the terrain shifted dramatically. The path narrowed to barely a meter wide, with sheer drops on one side and vertical rock face on the other. The stretcher barely fit through some sections. Angle at 30 degrees, Isla called back, watching Santos struggle with a tight corner. Tilt toward the rock face, not the drop. They navigated each obstacle one at a time, moving with agonizing slowness. Thompson remained unconscious, which Brennan said was both blessing and curse. He wasn't feeling pain, but his deteriorating condition was harder to monitor. At 0847 hours, they reached what Isla had feared most, a section where the pass simply disappeared, replaced by a near-vertical rock face that rose 4 meters before the trail resumed above. "You have got to be kidding me," Walsh breathed, staring up at the obstacle. "There's no other way around," Isla said, checking her map. "We have to go up." Fisher examined the rock face, testing handholds. "We can climb it, but not with the stretcher. We'd need to rig a pulley system, and even then it's dangerous." "How long?" Henrik asked. 20 minutes to set up, another 10 to execute the lift safely. Isla checked the time, 0849 hours. If the main convoy could reach the pass terminus by 0930, they'd have margin. But every delay ate into that safety window. "Do it," Henrik ordered. "Martin, help Fisher with the rigging." While Fisher and Isla set up the pulley system using climbing rope and carabiners, Brennan performed another assessment on Thompson. Her face was pale when she looked up. His blood pressure's dropping. "We're losing him." The words galvanized everyone. Fisher and Isla worked faster, fingers flying through knots and anchor points. Walsh and Santos secured the stretcher with additional straps. Henrik coordinated with the other survivors, positioning them to help guide the lift. At 0907 hours, 18 minutes, not 20, they were ready. On 3, Fisher counted. 1, 2, 3, lift. The stretcher rose slowly, swaying dangerously as it left the ground. Isla and Henrik managed the rope tension while Walsh climbed alongside, steadying the stretcher against the rock face. Every meter felt like a victory and a gamble. Thompson's stretcher caught on an outcrop halfway up. Walsh couldn't free it from his position. Without thinking, Isla secured her end of the rope and scrambled up the rock face, her climbing training finally proving its worth in the worst possible moment. She reached the snag, a strap caught on a sharp rock projection. Her position was precarious, balanced on a tiny foothold with one hand gripping the rock and the other reaching for the stretcher. One wrong move would send both her and Thompson tumbling down. "Easy, Martin," Henrik called up. "Don't rush it." Isla carefully unhooked the strap, freed it from the rock, and signaled to continue the lift. The stretcher rose the remaining distance, and Isla followed, her heart hammering. They cleared the rock face at 0919 hours and immediately resumed their march. The pass widened slightly, allowing faster movement. Isla could see the terminus ahead, maybe 500 meters, where the terrain flattened into something approaching a proper trail. Her radio crackled. "Rescue team, this is convoy actual. We've reached pass terminus." "Where are you?" 500 meters south, Henrik responded. "Patient critical. Have medical evac standing by." "Copy that. Medical team ready." They covered the final distance at near running pace, the stretcher bearers pushing through exhaustion. When they burst out of the pass at 0934 hours, a full medical team was waiting with advanced equipment and a waiting helicopter. Thompson was transferred immediately, medics working with practiced efficiency. Within 3 minutes, the helicopter lifted off, carrying him toward the base hospital. Isla collapsed against a boulder, her legs finally giving out. They'd done it. Against all odds, through impossible terrain, they'd gotten Thompson to advanced medical care in time. But as the adrenaline faded, reality set in. She'd helped Henrik disobey direct orders. They'd both face consequences that could end their military careers. The debriefing happened 3 days later, after Thompson had stabilized and doctors confirmed he would make a full recovery. Isla stood at attention in Lieutenant Colonel Davies' office, flanked by Henrik, while Captain Reeves presented his case for disciplinary action. Direct disobedience of orders during a critical operation, Reeves enumerated. Unauthorized route selection that endangered personnel. Violation of restriction orders. The list goes on, sir. Both Sergeant Larson and Specialist Martin showed complete disregard for military discipline. Davies listened silently, his expression unreadable. When Reeves finished, Davies turned to Henrik. Sergeant, do you have anything to say in your defense? Only that I'd make the same decision again, sir. Thompson's alive because we took that risk. That's not a defense, Sergeant. That's defiance. Henrik said nothing, his jaw set. Davies turned to Isla. And you, Specialist Martin? What's your defense? Isla thought about everything, the months of being overlooked, the suspicion when she'd finally proved her worth, the impossible choices that had led to this moment. She could apologize, show remorse, maybe save her career through contrition. But that would be a lie. No defense, sir. I knew the rules, understood the consequences, and chose to act anyway. If that makes me unsuitable for military service, I accept that judgment. Davies was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the base where soldiers went about their daily duties. Captain Reeves, you're dismissed. Sir, the disciplinary recommendations are noted and will be addressed. Dismissed, Captain. Reeves left, frustration evident in every movement. Davies waited until the door closed before speaking again. Do you know what the real problem is here? He asked, still facing the window. It's not that you broke rules. It's that you were right. You identified a route that saved lives, executed a rescue through impossible terrain, and made decisions under pressure that proved correct. He turned to face them. That terrifies people, Specialist Martin. Because if you can be right while breaking rules, it calls into question all the rules we follow without thinking. Sir, I never meant to. I know what you meant to do. You meant to serve effectively, and you did. The question is, how do we channel that effectiveness without destroying military discipline in the process? Davies returned to his desk and pulled out 2 files. After extensive review with Base Command, we've made our decision. Sergeant Larson, you're receiving a formal reprimand for disobeying direct orders. It will remain in your file but won't affect your current position. Henrik nodded, accepting the judgment. Specialist Martin, you're being transferred to search and rescue, effective immediately, with a promotion to sergeant. You'll undergo intensive training, and you'll learn to work within the system instead of around it. Isla stared at him, unable to process the words. Not punishment, but promotion. Not discharge, but opportunity. Sir, thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Search and rescue will push you harder than anything you've experienced. And if you ever disobey orders again, there won't be a third chance. Understood? Yes, sir. Understood, sir. For weeks later, Isla stood on the parade ground at Camp Valkyrie for a ceremony honoring the rescue team. She wore her new search and rescue uniform, the patch still feeling strange on her shoulder. When it was her turn to receive a commendation, she walked forward in her old fatigues, worn, faded, stained from that impossible journey through the pass. A visiting officer from another base leaned toward Davies, his voice carrying in the quiet. She's wearing old gear. Davies didn't hesitate. That's standard issue for battlefield heroes. The words rippled through the assembled soldiers. Isla stood taller, no longer the overlooked logistics specialist or the suspicious overachiever. She was Sergeant Isla Martin, search and rescue, someone whose determination had proven that the only real limitations were the ones we accepted without question. As she returned to formation, she caught Henrik's eye. He nodded once, a gesture of respect between soldiers who'd faced the impossible together and refused to accept it. The ceremony continued, but Isla's thoughts were already on the next mission, the next impossible rescue, the next chance to prove that sometimes the smallest soldiers carry the biggest impact. She'd spent months trying to fit into a system that couldn't see past her size. Now she'd changed that system, not by demanding recognition, but by earning it through actions that couldn't be ignored. The parade ground emptied as the ceremony concluded. Isla remained for a moment, looking at the mountains that had tested her, challenged her, and ultimately proven her worth. Somewhere out there, another mission was waiting. Another impossible situation that would need someone who refused to accept limitations. Isla smiled and headed toward the operations center. After all, proving impossible wrong had become her specialty. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.